Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Stocks rallying today as buy-the-dip investors emerged and traders waited out any signs of a new stimulus package. After the close, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin agreed to keep talking. Still, the S&P notched a fourth straight weekly drop as companies with more exposure to the U.S. economy led the drop. And tech for once wasn't to blame. In fact, the NASDAQ 100 extended its 2020 rally. More now with Abigail Doolittle, our Bloomberg Markets reporter who's been following all of the action. Abigail, what do you make of stocks rallying at the close?
Lots of action to follow, Emily. What an exhausting week. Up, down, up, down, up, down, and a mixed close on the week between these different indexes, making it just as exhausting. All of this volatility tells you what we were talking about yesterday and many days, in fact, the uncertainty out there. So there's the NASDAQ 100 on the week, and you can see those huge whipsaws up and down. Again, this tells you investors really don't know what's going on. And between this month and last month, not a lot has changed fundamentally for these companies. So this is just technical of movement, that huge froth that we had in August, and then in September taking some of it off. At this point, though, you do have the mega cap investors brave enough to step back in there, up 2% for the NASDAQ 100, the best week going back to August, largely driven by Apple having its best up week since August 21st. Amazon also up sharply, and then from a percentage standpoint, so Apple and Amazon, I should mention, from a weighting standpoint, as you know, between those two companies, nearly 20% of the NASDAQ 100's weight. But from a percentage standpoint, Zoom and DocuSign really climbing sharply higher. To my knowledge, none of this movement is on real fundamental news or change. It's really, again, momentum back into these stocks that have done so well on the year. And for the most part, these are companies that have benefited quite a bit from the pandemic. So investors wanting back in on what has worked after some of that froth has been removed.
So what stocks did move on real fundamental news? I mean, we know that Tesla had its battery day. We saw a move there. What did you see?
I would say Tesla is one of those stocks, although you could also make the case it has to do with the momentum, since that is the biggest momentum stock of the year, still up more than 350%. But, Oracle stands out on the week, really not doing much of anything at all, a tiny gain, but big swings up and down in between that. That, of course, on all of the drama around TikTok, still unclear what's going to happen between now and I believe the deadline for something to happen on whether or not the deal will go through with President Trump and China. Still, the negotiations happening there, I think on Sunday or Monday. So, investors net is kind of just hanging pat there. But since Oracle has been interested, that stock is up sharply, telling you investors like the diversification. Tesla, the battery day, didn't really wow. So that stock down about 8%, but again, up in a huge way on the year. So some of the froth removed there. From a story standpoint, the stock that stands out the most, Emily, Nikola, the electric truck company, getting absolutely pummeled on the week, down 43%. This, of course, is the CEO and founder resigned amid fraud allegations. There aren't a lot of words that investors hate. Well, actually, there could be a few, but one word that investors never want to hear, fraud. And you can see it right there in Nikola, the worst week ever, going back to when they, of course, came public last year, in 2018, down 43%.
Quite a dramatic slide, Abigail. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Thank you so much for that update, and happy Friday, Abigail. Have a wonderful weekend. I want to keep talking about Nikola. As Abigail mentioned, shares down over 50% from the start of September following that bombshell report accusing the company of fraud. That landed just after General Motors took an 11% stake in the company. So did they do their research? Joining us now, our Bloomberg Opinion senior columnist, Tim O'Brien. Tim, this story has captured the fascination of many. How could GM have missed this? What's your take? Did they do any research at all?
Well, I think it wasn't Hindenburg Research report that set this all in motion over the last 10 days or so, had new information in it. But our colleagues at Bloomberg News had reported way back in June that there were questions about Trevor Milton's own bona fides. So it shouldn't have been news to GM when Hindenburg's research report landed. This had been in the news in the past. So the question here is, what was Mary Barra looking at and what was she considering when they decided to do this deal? I think we also should remember upfront the financials on this deal were very good for GM. She got an 11% stake in the company without putting up any cash. Nikola has to pay GM $700 million to produce about 50,000 e-trucks for it. And GM gets to harvest all of the environmental credits that Nikola has around this particular line of production. So there were a lot of good, smart financial details here. The danger is the reputational ones. And it builds around the idea that Nikola is a house of cards, that Trevor Milton is a showman and a snake oil salesman in the worst case, who sold GM a bill of goods. The deal came to GM through Steve Gursky. Steve Gursky is a former GM executive turned deal maker. I think the question is, did Mary Barra, the CEO, rely too much on Gursky's judgment in this? She has said publicly that the company did its due diligence, that they had an armada of lawyers, accountants, and analysts look at this before they did the transaction, which they may have. And it still raises the question, then why didn't they think about the reputational risk that they've exposed themselves to?
So let's talk about that reputational risk. Can GM, can Mary Barra emerge from this unscathed? You know, even if they didn't know, it certainly doesn't look good.
Well, Mary Barra she's a very good, talented CEO. This is not going to bring the company down. In the best scenario, they clean up the mistakes they made around this, they learn their lesson, and they move on. But there's an SEC investigation, there's a DOJ investigation looking into the circumstances surrounding a bunch of claims from Nikola. Undoubtedly, the transaction with GM will fall under that purview, I would imagine. And I also think it's highly likely that GM's board will have to take a close look at this if they already haven't started, to just double check and make sure that Mary Barra and everyone else at GM dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's when they did that. So that is going to be unpleasant. Is this a thing that ends her tenure? I don't think so, but I'm not an insider there.
Meantime, Tim, you've also been looking closely at the upcoming election. Of course, you wrote the book on Trump. It is looking more and more likely that Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be President Trump's pick to replace Justice Ginsburg. It has been a dramatic and emotional turn of events for a lot of people. How do you think this changes what we see over the next few weeks going into the election?
You know, Emily, I don't know that it will change that much going into the election, other than it will incent both sides of the aisle, because there's a lot of bread and butter issues that are involved in this particular Supreme Court nomination. I think the highlight around it is the fate of Roe v. Wade. But I don't know that that's going to move the needle that much between now and November 3rd. I think the thing to watch for is what happens after November 3rd. If the Democrats get control of the Senate and the presidency, there's been a lot of interest around what they might do to seek retribution for Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate now ramming this appointment through with such a short time between now and Election Day, and essentially contravening their own statements in the past that they would never do anything like this. I think there's going to be a big political turf war after November 3rd, and I think that's where this will end up residing.
So do you think it makes sense for this to happen essentially before the election so that it doesn't potentially produce another schism between voters on actual election day, and voters can vote on the merits of whether, you know, they want President Trump in or out, rather than whether a Supreme Court nomination is riding on it?
Well, I personally believe from an institutional standpoint, it does not make sense to ram this through before Election Day. All the polling indicates that American voters would prefer that the decision is made after November. So whoever is elected president is the person who makes the final call on this. There's no question that deliberation will be rushed in this time period, and there's going to be a lot of strong arming going on around this. And I think given the fact that a Supreme Court appointment is a life appointment, I think it's something that should be much more deliberate than what the process right now entails. So no, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it erodes institutional respect for both the court and Congress. And both of those institutions already went through this with the Kavanaugh hearing. I think to force feed this again is really going to, I think, raise doubts in the public's mind about both the quality and the integrity of the process. And I think that's a bad thing.
Now, you've been looking into some of the president's statements about the election, mail-in voting, the process itself being rigged. Is it rigged? And if President Trump doesn't win on Election Day, will he declare victory? If he doesn't win, will he be prosecuted? How do you see that chain of events playing out?
Well, first and foremost, no. The electoral system in this country is not rigged. We have one of the most honest and well-built electoral systems in the world. It has flaws, there are abuses, but it is not rigged and it is not riddled with fraud for as much as the president and the attorney general keep saying that. It's just factually untrue. A large number of states, including red states, have done both mail-in balloting and run honest elections for quite a long time. And the secretaries of states in those states who actually run the elections have great confidence in them. This is an election year ploy by Donald Trump, who I suspect is very worried about losing, since the polls are so strongly against him right now, that he's looking for anything to blame for his defeat other than his own actions. Having said that, there's no question that what he's saying and doing has the potential to erode public respect for the process, and that's a dangerous and damaging thing. His son has taken to Twitter to incent people to take to the streets and march on polling places to make sure there's no fraud. They're setting the stage for very unusual, vicious, I think, public violence that we all should be opposed to, regardless of what side of the aisle we're on. I think, however, Donald Trump is also a paper tiger in a lot of these situations. If he loses, I do not think he's going to try to call the military out into the streets of the country to preserve his office. If he were to do that, I don't think the military would listen to him. But I don't think we're going to get there. And I think it's a time for people to take a breath, be worried, keep an eye on the process, be vigilant, but don't be afraid, because our institutions have been bent and beaten up a little bit over the last few years, but they're still strong.
Okay. Tim O'Brien, thank you so much for weighing in. Tim O'Brien of Bloomberg Opinion. Always good to have your opinions here on the show. Before we go to break, we've got some breaking news about TikTok. A judge has set Sunday morning for a hearing at 9:30 a.m. unless the United States agrees to delay an impending ban on TikTok. This at a request of ByteDance. We're going to dig here, talk about what this means after this quick break. This is Bloomberg. A federal judge in Washington has set a hearing on TikTok's request to halt the U.S. ban at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, unless the U.S. agrees to delay its enforcement, currently set to begin at about midnight Sunday night. The U.S. today filed a sealed motion opposing TikTok's efforts. Let's get the details from Bloomberg's Shelly Banjo, who has been covering this story day by day. Shelly, what does this latest hearing on a Sunday morning, no less, mean?
Right. So this is in reaction to the delay that the company TikTok had gotten already from the Commerce Department, delaying a ban by about a week. And so because it seems like they haven't gotten a deal across the finish line yet, and TikTok still doesn't want to be banned from the Apple and Google app stores, that they continued on this journey to fight the president's executive order in court. And so now it's up to a federal judge to say, are you going to halt the ban or not? I mean, the Commerce Department could still also come out and give another delay, which would not be surprising considering they have already provided a delay for TikTok to be able to continue its negotiations.
So what's next then? Obviously, we wait for the Sunday hearing, but obviously the bigger issue about how Chinese companies, technology companies, can do business in the United States is not over.
That's right. I mean, this deal in particular has so many different stakeholders between the U.S. government, the Chinese government also needs to sign off on any kind of deal, not to mention all the different companies and the investors that are involved in it. But it's really a microcosm for the bigger issue, which is, the U.S. and China and how they're going to get along in the future, and what the U.S. is going to, consider for tech policy going down the line. How can companies continue to operate globally cross-border between U.S. and China and other countries as long as, they have this fear that a U.S. president could come after them.
All right. Well, I know you'll be tuning in at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. Thank you, Shelly, for continuing to follow the twists and turns of this. Bloomberg Shelly Banjo. Thanks very much. All right, coming up. Ever wonder who powers your shopping checkout experience on Facebook and Instagram? Well, BigCommerce is one of just 2 platforms that enables you to do just that. We're going to speak to the CFO next. This is Bloomberg. The pandemic has accelerated the shift to e-commerce, pushing online sales above $210 billion in the second quarter of this year. That's up over 30% from the previous quarter, according to the U.S. Commerce Department. One of the companies that empowers merchants to build their businesses online is BigCommerce, whose partners include Amazon, eBay, Instagram, and more. Joining us now for more, Robert Alvarez, CFO and COO of BigCommerce. He is the latest guest in our Retail Transformed series. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. So give us a big picture look at demand. How has the pandemic impacted demand among your customers and on your platforms?
Yeah, Emily, it's e-commerce was accelerating even before COVID. And I think in the March timeframe, we just saw just a significant spike in transactions really across the board in every major category of our merchants. And that surge has only continued. So I think the shift online was accelerating. People thought we would be accelerating this year. No one thought it would be accelerating to the degree that we're seeing it right now.
Now, you're one of just 2 platforms that allows shoppers to buy directly on Instagram and Facebook. That said, even though we all thought that shopping on Instagram and Facebook could be a huge opportunity, it hasn't grown as quickly as some expected. How much traffic is that actually driving?
I'd say it's still early days, but social commerce is going to be an important way people consume and buy products. We want to be on the forefront of that. I think the better the user experience, the better the adoption. And I think with our latest integration with Facebook and Instagram, the ability to buy and check out on Instagram without having to be redirected to another site is another way to improve that experience. And that experience is going to be improved pretty rapidly, we believe, over time. And, look, the consumer behavior is driving online transactions. That experience that we can provide or help our merchants provide to their merchants, enabling that user experience that makes it really easy and seamless to see their products, buy their products. Social commerce is a big way we help merchants do that. Selling on marketplaces like Amazon and eBay and others is a way we do that. So the more ways that consumers look for products and want to consume or buy products, BigCommerce is going to be in the forefront of that.
What's your outlook for the e-commerce market post-pandemic? How much shopping that's moved online goes back offline? It has to be a certain subset.
Yeah, Emily, it's really interesting. Pre-COVID, it took over 20 years for e-commerce to be 10% of retail, and that was 2017. McKinsey published a report end of 19, it was 15% of total retail. I think in the months since COVID, it's in the mid 30s. So it's almost been like a 10-year acceleration in terms of how much e-commerce is driving as a percentage of total retail. Listen, it's hard to predict what it's going to be, what the new normal is going to be. I think everyone recognizes that there's been a shift. The consumer buying experiences have shifted. Online experiences are more normal today than ever before. I think when things get back to normal, or as normal as maybe they were before, I think there is going to be a permanent shift to some degree in terms of consumer behavior, consumer expectations, and technology platforms like BigCommerce and our ability to really drive even further adoption. It's really difficult to tell, but we do know that e-commerce is only going to continue to accelerate. At some point it's going to be 30%, 40%, 50% of total retail. Exactly when that will be, I don't know, but that's definitely where the e-commerce market is headed.
Now, BigCommerce had a big successful IPO last month. Shares have surged up to 400% since then. They've come back down in recent weeks. We've been having this conversation about pricing, about valuations. There's critics saying valuations are too high. What do you think?
Yeah, the IPO for us was great because we, in that process, we could ensure that the shares we were selling, we could put in the hands of investors that we thought were long-term minded, really had conviction in our story, believed in what we were doing. And the performance since the IPO, it's been great to see. It's been great to see how well we've done, but the focus really is around our products and our merchants. It's still early days for BigCommerce. The opportunity for us to grow is really exciting. And I tell all of our employees all the time, what got us here is a focus on our customers and a focus on each other and our partners. And that's really needs to be the focus right now. It's very distracting otherwise.
I'm sure it's hard not to watch the stock. Robert Alvarez, CFO and COO of BigCommerce, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, Palantir set to go public next week. Airbnb also planning to list. We'll get thoughts from Okta CEO Todd McKinnon on going public in a pandemic next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. September has turned out to be a huge month for IPOs when, at the start of the pandemic, we thought the IPO window would be sealed shut for months. First, there was Snowflake's splashy debut, along with Sumo Logic, JFrog, and Unity. Now, another big tech company is about to hit the public markets, and that is Palantir, set to debut next week via a direct listing. With so much uncertainty in the midst of a pandemic and a critical election less than 2 months away, what should they expect? Joining us now to discuss the current IPO environment is Okta CEO Todd McKinnon. Todd, thanks so much for joining us. Okta went public a couple of years ago, so you know something about this. We have been in a roaring debate since last week about whether these companies, Snowflake, JFrog, Unity, whether they left money on the table. You see Snowflake shares going up over 100%. Where are you in this debate? Did the bankers misprice this?
I think it's the wrong debate. I mean, all these companies, Snowflake and Palantir, they have fundamentally better technologies than their competitors. They're surfing trends like everything is data-centric now with Palantir, and you need to analyze that data. Or with Snowflake, everything is moving to cloud and the workloads are on the cloud. So these companies are in a great position over the long term. And we can talk about certain specifics on the IPO, but they need to get out. They need to get their companies moving forward. They need to think about all the variables just involved and not the specific price on the opening day. And they need to move on and get about their business of building great companies over the long term.
Now, Palantir is going out of the gate next week. They've chosen a direct listing. Airbnb will be happening later this year. We don't know whether there'll be a direct listing or an IPO. If they called you for advice, what would you say?
I would say, there's a reason why hundreds and hundreds of companies have gone public a certain way. And you have to think really hard about trying to innovate around your IPO. You need to just get through it, get a fair price, get a good, stable group of investors, get a stable stock price as much as possible, get your employees comfortable as much as possible, and move on and get back to the business of building your company. I think that's one thing that gets lost in all of this. You're trying to build a long-term sustainable company, and the fewer distractions you can have and the better relationships you can build with investors, the better for the company.
Now, Todd, as we have been speaking, we've gotten some news in. Poshmark, for example, filing its paperwork to go public. How do you think, obviously, it seems the IPO window is wide open, but what does that mean for everything else? What does that mean for M&A in this environment? Are deals happening?
I think that what you're seeing is these secular shifts to cloud computing, to e-commerce. You're seeing things with Snowflake or Palantir about data being incredibly valuable to companies and new tools and ways to mine that data. So you're seeing these secular shifts, and there's a lot of money out there, and the money wants to follow where the long-term future trends of technology are. So investors want those returns, and they're willing to invest. So whether that's an IPO or M&A, the people are betting on those long-term trends. One thing that is interesting, I think there was a pause for a while because people had to figure out how to do some of these complex deals all online. How do you go buy a company over Zoom? How do you build that face-to-face relationship with that company that you're trying to buy? How are you sure that that company is going to work closely with you to make your customers successful? That's harder to do online. Sometimes it's harder to do an IPO roadshow online. So I think now that we're figuring some of that stuff out, you'll see more of these deals start to happen.
Let's talk about figuring things out. Companies have now been working at home for a while now. I'm curious, now that we've been in this for 6 months, how is it actually impacting culture? I mean, we've heard so many CEOs say, we're doing this for the foreseeable future. Employees shouldn't feel pressured to come back to the office, but is it actually working? Have you been able to build culture, as you would the same way if you were in the office?
The main thing I think about is we have to make sure that we're open to the fact that we might not know. I mean, it's different. We haven't been through this before. People are going through incredible stresses in their personal lives with their families, maybe health issues. So we don't know. We're trying our best. And what I tell my team at Okta is that we have to stay open to the signals coming in. How is your team doing? How is the business doing? And stay agile and take those signals and make sure we iterate and do the best thing we can. And I'm very confident that if we do that over the long term, we will not only survive, we'll also thrive through all of this and come out on the other end with a stronger company than we went into it with.
Meantime, you just hired another female executive, a senior female executive, Susan St. Ledger from Splunk. And I'm curious, what is it like hiring a senior leader in COVID? And what are the trends you're seeing in hiring in general at this time?
Well, I couldn't be more thrilled about Susan. We're very lucky to get her on the team and to help take us forward in the president of go-to-market role. And, I've known Susan. I met Susan when I was working at Salesforce, and she has a very unique combination of both, first of all, being very customer-centric, but also when I first met her, she was selling platform at Salesforce. So she knows about how to sell platforms, her most recent experience. She knows how to sell technology to IT. She knows about the cloud delivery model. She has a technical background. She's led teams. She's built great teams. So we're very lucky to get her. And to your point about hiring people when everything is remote, I'm lucky to not have had to build a relationship from scratch with someone, so I can bring on someone that I've known for a long time and is a world-class executive to help lead us forward. I think that's a pretty fortunate position to be in, because it is harder to build these relationships online. We're all trying to meet people, get to know people, and sometimes in a key role like this, it's better to tap into one of the world's best leaders that you happen to already know.
All right. Todd McKinnon, CEO of Okta. Thank you so much for joining us, Todd, and sharing those insights. Now, as we've been talking, the New York Times is reporting that President Trump has officially picked Judge Amy Coney Barrett to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court. This will kick off a furious and contentious process. The president aims to force Senate confirmation before Election Day. And if indeed Judge Coney Barrett is confirmed, this will significantly alter and reshape the Supreme Court for years to come. We'll continue to follow that story. Coming up, Amazon is expanding its offerings in the hotly contested gaming market. Will their new gaming service, Luna, be able to keep up? We'll take a look at the new platform next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon hadn't made many big moves in the gaming world since buying the live streaming gamer platform Twitch for $1 billion in 2014, until yesterday, when the e-commerce giant declared it wants an even bigger piece of the $150 billion gaming industry. Amidst a slew of new Echo and Kindle devices, Amazon announced a new cloud gaming service called Luna, aimed at cutting costs for traditional game consoles and games. With us now, Michael Levine, Pivotal Research Senior Analyst who covers the company. So, Michael, what are Amazon's chances in the gaming market? Obviously, you've got huge entrenched players here. Microsoft just made a big acquisition buying Bethesda Softworks, which means they're going to have more content. Can Amazon really compete?
I think that they actually can, Emily. Not surprisingly, and I'd say consistent with their strategy, they've probably been very mindful of having the hardware that's basically associated with Luna come in at a very attractive low price point relative to other gaming console offerings that are out in the market. I know that they've been in the market for quite some time in terms of hiring product engineers, hiring folks to basically develop IP. And look, they know they've got an entrenched, intrigued audience based on what they've got with Twitch. Do I think you're going to see Amazon come out with some AAA content the way you see come out of an Electronic Arts, a Take-Two, and Activision? I don't think so, but I don't think you need to for this to actually end up being pretty successful for them.
I spoke with Amazon Senior Vice President of Devices and Services yesterday, Dave Limpt. I asked him this very same question. How do they compete in an already crowded market? Take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, I think it is a big market. Gaming, we're kind of in the renaissance of gaming right now, and different customers are going to want different types of gaming, and I think Luna brings that to them.
Does Amazon need original titles, though, to keep this up?
I think they can get away
Michael?
with a combination of, yes, I think you can get away with a combination of original and license. The real key thing from my perspective is a very attractive price point. Right. So, a lot of what they're able to do is take advantage of the fact that you can get a lot of entertainment for a significantly lower investment. I mean, $6 a month is not a lot. If they actually see a lot of success around this, I mean, my viewpoint has always been, even they talked yesterday about an expanded, Fire TV offering. You could see over time this getting bundled and tied together with something like their core Prime offering. Right, so I think it likely is something to do with that strategically. If I look at a couple of years, and as the exec from Amazon had commented, I mean, I think COVID has definitely been a big part of it, but obviously gaming usage has exploded. I mean, so they're coming to market with a good looking device, well priced, and not a lot of upfront investment to be able to get a healthy amount of bang for your buck.
All right, Michael Levine of Pivotal Research. It'll certainly be an interesting holiday season to watch. Thank you. Continuing with tech, I spoke earlier with IBM's Research Vice President, Jeffrey Weltzer. I asked him about how AI and quantum computing can play a role in minimizing or even perhaps preventing future pandemics. Take a listen.
When viruses begin to spread, it's all about getting information quickly. So, the earlier we could have figured out how to track what was happening and seeing where it was spreading and had the tests to go after it, we could have maybe done a better job of figuring out what strategies we could have used. I think in reality, whenever you get a disease like this, you can't ever really stop the whole thing, but we certainly could have found in hindsight ways that we could have used technology to track and maybe mitigate it to some extent.
Now, you've been highlighting AI and quantum computing. How, if they had been better integrated into our systems or more advanced, could that have helped?
Well, I think particularly on the AI side is we find ways to actually see patterns ahead of time on either disease spread in this case or other patterns that maybe we couldn't see as people because we can't look at that much data at once. That actually can give us sort of the red alert or the flag that says, hey, you should look at this. It still takes a person to come in then and analyze that to figure out what's really happening. But this is exactly one of the things we like with AI is the ability to see a broader picture first and then bring in a person with an expert to take action on it.
So do you think that AI, quantum computing, and this kind of technology could ultimately replace human decision-making in a pandemic?
No, definitely not. I think one of the things we're finding that's really great about using, whether it's AI or quantum, is this sort of augmentation or assisting role, right? So the reality is it can do things at a scale a person couldn't do to collect that information up, but it still requires then a person who understands what's the goal, what are the ethics, what are the issues I'm trying to really solve, what's all the rest of the context out there to take that information, use their own expertise to make the actual decisions, which will be critical.
So where is research leading in this field, and what are your predictions for the next 5 to 10 years?
All right, so all 5 that we did this year for the 5 and 5 were around how we could accelerate scientific discovery to help with problems with climate change and COVID. On COVID, what we really focused on was, could we find ways to even repurpose current drugs to actually treat the disease? Because usually a disease takes 10 years to get a new drug out and billions of dollars. But oftentimes the drug we use today might actually be safe and be able to actually help with COVID. So how can using AI to search through all that kind of data find potential candidates? And we even have a couple groups now that have around the world started to find candidates that they could use for reuse.
Now, when you talk about climate change, how can technology help there? I know that you're also looking at how technology can be involved in sustainability. Here in California, we've been facing these devastating wildfires, horrible air quality all along the West Coast. How could technology help?
Yeah, I've been suffering from that as well in San Jose here. So I think one of the things we're looking at are sort of all aspects. One is, how do we do a better job of carbon capture? So can we find materials that could capture CO2 from the air? Maybe even take that CO2 and use it for something else like plastic production or something. What are ways we could make more sustainable batteries? Can we get some of the things that are in batteries, the heavy metals, out? Batteries are very important for renewable energy and electric cars. That's going to be an increasing problem. Can we find ways to make materials that go into our computer chips more sustainable and more environmentally friendly? All these little things add up to make a difference.
It seems like we're at a turning point when it comes to battery development. We've been following Tesla's Battery Day, for example, and the announcements they recently made. Is that the best way to put it, that we're kind of on the cusp of a big change in how batteries and renewable energy could impact our lives?
I think we are on a cusp. I think that we obviously have got a lot of good production going in now, so a lot of our power can be generated by renewables, but the reality is the sun's not always shining and the wind's not always blowing. So having good storage requires really large, very energy-dense batteries that are very safe. The technology we've been looking at not only remove the cobalt and nickel, which have concerns from a resource perspective and an environmental impact perspective, also turned out to be a safer battery, had less chance of flaming up, similar energy density, power density, and could actually charge faster. So sometimes by looking for something that was actually going to be better for the environment, it turned out we actually came up with a better battery as well.
So how do we make sure that batteries are used to their full potential? Where do you see the applications, whether it's in electric cars or elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think clearly electric cars is one that people are very focused on. We don't want to have that range anxiety. But I think if you think about it in the renewable energy space, you would have solar panels in those places where there's lots of sun. You want to be able to store really large battery packs, that extra energy, then redistribute it on the grid as necessary, or even in people's homes. We've had a few power outages as well during the recent fires and things. If you were able to store up battery energy there from your solar power ahead of time, that could really be very useful if it's large enough to actually run your home.
And when it comes to sustainability, do you think other companies are doing enough?
I think we all could do more. I think, the reality is everything we do, we'd like to see the product cycle be taking into account the sustainability aspect from the beginning. I think for a lot of us, we make the product first and we think about how to make sure it has less impact. I think we're discovering that if you really use, particularly some of the technologies like AI, to actually think about it ahead of time, you might find a better way to go forward from the beginning.
Jeffrey Welser there, IBM Research Vice President. We will be right back with more of Bloomberg Technology after this quick break. Finally, this hour, President Trump plans to name Amy Coney Barrett to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. The president, we are told, could still change his mind, but Amy Coney Barrett has been the favorite and looks like she still is the favorite. Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian joins us now on the phone. Jordan, what is the latest that we know? We know the president had promised to announce a pick as early as tomorrow. Will it be Amy Coney Barrett?
Yeah, sources are telling us that she is expected to be the pick tomorrow, that the president has been telling associates that she is the pick. So I think, the president is someone who obviously changes his mind from time to time, and that could happen between now and Saturday at 5 p.m. when the announcement is expected. But all indications right now is that Amy Coney Barrett will be his Supreme Court nominee.
Tell us a little bit more about Judge Barrett. Obviously, this is going to kick off a huge partisan battle. One of the very specific issues, of course, Roe versus Wade, has a lot of people incredibly concerned, especially on the left. What is it that stands out about her record to you?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. She's a favorite of social conservatives. She is a staunch opponent of abortions. That's something that the president and the White House think can excite the president's base heading into the election. The president wants to cement a conservative majority on the court. He's actually been upset with some of the rulings from his Justice Neil Gorsuch, who he named in 2017. So he wants someone who's going to be a rock-solid conservative.
Right. Some of the justices, also Justice Roberts, has made some rulings contrary to what the president might have wanted. And I just want to say that officially, Bloomberg News is reporting that President Trump plans to name Amy Coney Barrett to replace Justice Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. Jordan, this could significantly, likely will significantly alter the court for a generation to come. I mean, Judge Barrett is a very young woman, one of the youngest justices ever to serve potentially on the Supreme Court. Talk to us about the process and what happens now. We believe that President Trump will try to force the Senate to confirm Judge Barrett before Election Day, correct?
That's right. Yeah, he said this week that he wants his new justice on the court, in part so they can help sort any challenge to the election result on November 3rd. So that's sort of a stunning statement there from the president, but he has made his indications clear, and that's going to really play a factor in this presidential race. Of course, coronavirus and the faltering U.S. economy are still of top concern to voters, but we're seeing indications in polls that this might actually backfire on the president, because most voters are saying that they want the next president, the person who's elected in November, to pick that seat, not necessarily President Trump right now. And Democrats are energized by the prospect of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat falling into the hands of conservatives. So this while the president believes and his allies believe this could be an asset for them, on the other hand, this could also be an asset for Joe Biden.
Well, exactly. So is it really the smartest course of action, if President Trump wants to be elected, to push this through with 6 weeks to go?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the million-dollar question, right? Is this a gamble that's going to pay off for the president? What the president's campaign team is looking at is 2016, when he put forth a list of conservative justices, and that really helped him beat Hillary Clinton. There were exit polls showing that voters who thought Supreme Court was a big concern for them, they mostly sided with Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. This time around, it's different, though. The president has already put 2 justices on the court, and we're seeing now that liberals are the ones who are energized. They want to get in. They want to help shift the balance back toward the center or the left. And, with already having 2 justices, conservatives are a bit less energized by this issue now than they were 4 years ago.
All right. Once again, Bloomberg is reporting that President Trump plans to name Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We could hear that announcement from the president tomorrow. Of course, the president could still change his mind, as he often does, but Judge Barrett has been the favorite, it seems, for the last several days, still is the favorite. And as Bloomberg is reporting, President Trump plans to name her as his pick tomorrow. Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian, thank you so much for that update. I'll let you go continue to get more headlines on that. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Quick programming note that next week, Bloomberg will be bringing you special coverage of the presidential debates. That will start Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Up next, Wall Street Week with David Weston. Have a great weekend, everyone. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.